From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
Hi, I'm Daniel Schweiger. I'm the host of Film Music Live, and we're happy to have you here. As a relationship that humbly began on an English stage and is now gracing any number of Hollywood extravaganzas, the decades-long director-composer duet between Kenneth Branagh and Patrick Doyle has yielded Shakespearean wonder with Henry IV, Much Ado About Nothing, and the Oscar-nominated Hamlet, uncovered the mysteries of Dead Again, Sleuth, and Murder on the Orient Express, and gave thunder to the Marvel god Thor, suspensefully rebooted Jack Ryan, and put lushly beautiful new shoes on Cinderella. While Doyle has shown up slightly less on screen in these films than his friend, the composer certainly isn't lacking for numerous scores apart from Branagh. Yet there's something about this particular kind of magic that brings out the best from the Scottish composer, who now enchants with fantastical Irish charm for their latest lavish adventure of Branagh's adaptation of Artemis Fowl, a colorful YA mashup of Men in Black, Harry Potter, and Percy Jackson. Artemis finds the smartest 12-year-old master thief on Earth going head-on against a fairy empire under the earth that's determined to keep their existence a secret, even if it costs Artemis's father his life. With no small experience in the world of Harry Potter himself, Patrick Doyle cleverly brings together a soulful Irish sound with the epic excitement of super-sophisticated ancient creatures. It's old-school orchestral scoring meeting futuristic percussion for one of the composer's most clever scores. Now, live from England, to talk about an enchanted collaborations plunge into a mythic high-tech world is Patrick Doyle. Welcome to Film Music Live, Patrick.
Thank you very much for having me. My pleasure to be here. Thank you, Daniel.
We're happy to have you. So tell me about first... Oh, thank you. So tell me about first meeting Kenneth. I mean, did you know right off the bat that this was going to be the beginning of a beautiful friendship that's gone on for decades?
Well, it's a good question. I certainly, when I first met him, I knew that this man was an extraordinary person, one of the brightest people I've ever met. And there was a chemistry. When you meet certain people, there's a connection, and I certainly could feel this. Whether it was to do with we're both Celts. He's originally from Northern Ireland, and of course, as you said earlier, I'm Scottish. So there's a strong connection between these cultures. There's only a short distance between these islands, so that was part of it. Part of the connection too. There seemed to be a synergy there, and I sort of knew. I knew deep down there was something different with this guy and unique about this guy. And when he asked me to work with him, I certainly knew that it was going to be an interesting artistic experience.
Now, your first score was for, I believe, a TV version of Shakespeare before jumping into Henry IV, which is still arguably the best.
Henry V, sorry.
Henry V, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And, arguably it's still the most highly regarded Shakespeare adaptation ever made and the best Shakespeare score ever done. I mean, you're starting your collaboration with Citizen Kane of Shakespeare. What was that experience like, just taking it on such a grand orchestral scale?
Well, it was a daunting experience because up until then I'd only written for very small chamber groups. I'd worked for 10 years in theatre, with obviously without both as a performer and also as a musical director, with very small budgets and very small theatre groups. So it was an incredibly daunting experience. But one which an opportunity which I grabbed with both hands, and it was what I knew that I'd have to do the best work possible, because the quality of the film was quite apparent, and Ken's talent too. I'd have to rise to the occasion. Um, there was an expectation because of William Walton had scored an earlier version directed by and produced by and starred Laurence Olivier. This was a wartime picture. It was more a propaganda exercise, but Ken's version was much more realistic and warts and all, and so it was a much more contemporary approach, and that's what he was keen to do, was to have the music sounding symphonic and more accessible and contemporary to a modern audience. Um, but I spent a year, germinating ideas and also coming up with themes, and I was in the film as Alexander Court, just a line, but I was there um, throughout the filming as a coterie, amongst a coterie of actors. So I soaked up the atmosphere of the filming, and it was certainly a, a hugely difficult experience, but it paid off, thank goodness.
Now, the movie that really put you both on the Hollywood map was Dead Again. And
Yeah.
what's so interesting about that is that it's a movie about a composer who's caught in this reincarnation mystery where the whole score has to pay off an original piece that he's writing. What was that challenge like?
Well, it was tricky because the film went through a different sort of metamorphosis. It was initially a lot of the shots, the flashbacks were all in color, and then they previewed it, and the audience felt that those characters, Roman and his and Margaret, those two characters, they were less interested in them than the two modern characters played by both Emma Thompson and Ken. So they reshot some new scenes for the contemporary couple, and they made the flashbacks into black and white, and sort of cut down the story. So it became much more about the modern characters, but nevertheless the composer, Roman, this constant main theme he was striving for was something that I had to write very early on, and then once I'd written it, that I would have to then develop it for the rest of the score. And I remember suddenly Ken decided he wanted to film a scene earlier than expected, so he wanted a theme for the following day. So we got together in I think it was it was in the Fox Studios before they were renovated, the Newman stage before it was renovated. No, it was the Paramount, the old. What am I talking about? The old Paramount stage. There was a piano in it, the old Paramount recording stage, and we both sat down, and I just played it. Do dee do dee do. It's just, that's great. Let's go for lunch. Sounds great. That's what he's like. You can hear it. It's instant. That's exactly what I need. I mean, but the thing is, I've been living with it for so long, the story, and involved in production in cameo parts for fun. So really, I'd been again drinking in the story, and subconsciously, I'd been working on I suppose music. So anyway, that's how that happened, and that was me. I had to then develop that throughout the rest of the score. But that's the art of film composing. Certainly, and you've got to be able to take a motif or a theme and develop it, whether you turn it upside down or whether you expand it or contract it or use it as a motor theme. That's part of your craft. But that's how the story of the main theme of. But it wasn't particularly daunting in terms of or odd being a composer, right? For a composer, at least I understood how he felt to be in Hollywood. His case was slightly different from mine because he wanted to be a concert composer in the story, and I indeed was a film composer. Um, and he was a fish out of water, and I was very much at home on the set. So, but it was a nice contrast, though.
Now you start having a terrific career on your own. You begin a partnership with Regis Wagner for Indochine. You do beautiful
Yeah.
scores for Into the West, Needful Things, Carlito's Way, and you go off book with Ken when you adapt Mary Shelley for Frankenstein. What was that experience
Yes.
like, switching from Shakespeare to a monster film with him?
Well, of course, it's high drama. Frankenstein, the story is a huge story, and these Shakespearean stories are 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 grand and dramatic, and they're full of soliloquies, which indeed are musical, are arias, are written arias. So, although it's gothic and I suppose it's science fiction gothic, nevertheless, the sort of high drama in it, the heightened drama, the grand drama in it, is not different. It's not any different from that which you see in the great Shakespeare plays. So it wasn't that far removed from our collaborative work.
Now I'm going to light speed through wonderful films that you've done together, terrific scores, and we're going to get to Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, which in a way
Yeah.
sets the tone for Artemis Fowl. What was it like entering that world of fairies and goblins and magic for you?
Well, Mike Newell, when John Williams couldn't do it, I think he was doing other things. Mike Newell asked me, and I'd already worked with Mike on Into the West, and he said that the reason why he hired me was that I'd been an actor, and he that had a great sense of magic that that he experienced when on the score for Into the West, because it was a very low budget picture, and there were no visual effects, just a horse, and people talk about this magical horse. So the musician had to provide all the magic, and he felt that this was a great boost to his production. And also the third reason was he felt I was a good laugh. So um, that was quite nice. And you're a laugh, a good laugh. So we certainly had fun together. But that they were the real a sense of drama, an actor and a magic in drama, and my sort of personality suited Mike. And I love Mike because he's completely confident and assured, and he either loves it or hates it, and very clear direction. And the stories, of course, um, by the third part of the or the fourth part, I beg your pardon, um, it had become a phenomenon then. So I knew that I'd have some big shoes to fill in terms of John's previous great work. Um, so yeah, but I knew this would be a different. I said obviously a different director, different production, and the stories in terms of the characters, they're older, they're young adults, and there was a love element, and a strong Voldemort's presence in it was very strong, moody, and I felt there would be great opportunities for fresh thematic material because having so many different characters, and I enjoy writing thematic material for various characters and tying them throughout, intertwining them throughout the score as the score develops. The magic side um, was sheer joy, and the of course the dance, the waltzes, and all that side of it was extremely enjoyable and good fun. It was hard work in that there was um, a lot of music in the film, and 30 minutes of music wasn't used. Um, I'd written some I'd write various pieces of music and say to Mike, what do you think? Well, I'd have, what about this? What about that? I mean, I tried three times, three different versions of the Hogwarts hymn to be sung by the four different houses. But in fact, that never happened on the film. But I gather it's on the CD, on the DVD extras. But one of the themes for the Hogwarts song became the Hogwarts theme, which in fact appears in the story. So none of this work that wasn't maybe directly in the film went to waste. But the magic, the whole magic side of it, there's there's also different elements you use in terms of creating magic. There was very little synth work, and it was all through the orchestra. A sense of wonderment was required, and also some deep, dark, and pardon upon moody music. So it was mainly because of Into the West, which is a magic story about a magic horse, a mystical horse. That's what convinced me that I would be the person for the job. And I'm glad he chose me because it's an extraordinary phenomenon, and I'm very honored to be part of it.
Now, you and Ken take a gigantic franchise leap together when you do Thor. What was
Yes.
it like entering this Marvel universe?
Well, it was like I suppose it's like the. I'm just thinking about this now. The Marvel franchise is is a bit like a rugby team, and you've got to join. You've got to replace. I don't know, a forward. You've got to sort of squeeze yourself into the middle of this enormous sort of machine. So, as Ken said, you're asked to do one of these enormous tentpole movies, these enormous um, franchises. Um, they ask you to. It's like being asked by McDonald's to redesign the McDonald's sign using the M, but they want you to redesign it, but don't change the M. But I want you to come in and do your own thing, but don't change the M. So in a sense, you've got to find your little niche to get into it, as well as provide the franchise for what it needs, because there are so many expectations of these films, what people expect characters to be like, and what the look of it is, that you have to slot yourself into. It isn't as free flowing instantly as an independent picture, for example. But Ken and the company Marvel were terrific about allowing us, some space, and Ken was keen with the scriptwriters to give it a sense of humor, and I believe that was the first Marvel picture to have sort of comedic sort of irony in the characters, and they saw that it worked. There was many discussions, detailed discussions about the cape and the look of it, and how would it look silly, and how do we make it not look silly, and how to make him look majestic and out of place but sort of cool. And the music has to follow suit in these requirements in terms of the look of the picture. Um, the main theme for it, I remember Kevin Feige came. They were filming here in Shepperton, and Kevin came over and sat down at the piano, and I played the main theme to him. And as far as I know, he'd never had a composer do this in the old way. And he's a huge supporter of my music, Kevin, and so it was great to have him just sort of chill out in the room and be part of the early creative process on it. And the end title sequence, they were very kind in that piece was sent to them as a piece on its own to demonstrate the score. That for me was the demo for both Ken, his approval, and then the company's approval. And they loved that piece, and they put that to give it its place in the end titles, to just sit on its own. So because he tried it within the body of the picture, but there was too much story going on. So, but very daunting and difficult job. But it launched the whole franchise of Thor, or the whole story of Thor. And again, I'm very proud that that Ken asked me to do it, and gave me, as usual, his tremendous support.
Now, if you put together these technically sophisticated gods that we saw in Thor with the magic of Harry Potter, you might get something like Artemis Fowl, which is like this
Yes.
gigantic combination of all these different kind of YA
Yes.
elements. What was your reaction like when you saw the kind of crazy quilt of this film and the approach that you and Ken wanted to take for the score?
Well, you're right. It is a crazy quilt, and it pulls on every resource you have in terms of your experience. Um, it's rock and roll. It's Celtic rock and roll. It's romantic. It has sweeping symphonic moments. It has it has some comedy in it. It has high drama in it, and so it really in terms of the the palette, the quilt, the sonorities in the orchestra and all the colors, um, it was very demanding, especially the troll. I found right. How do I compete with this troll? This enormous troll. What did I do to control my troll music? Sorry, I interrupted you. Sorry.
That is my sorry. Oh no, my apologies. There's a time delay obviously between us.
Okay.
That's my favorite music actually in the whole score, and it just kind of goes back to how you write these great driving pieces. And in a way, with the troll, it brought me back to one of my favorite pieces that you've ever written, which is the whole subway chase in the train chase in Carlito's Way, where you just kind of have this driving rhythm that just doesn't stop, and again that really just knocks the troll music and Artemis out of the park for me.
Well, I must say that took two, 3 passes before that eventually materialized, because there's a way of writing these. There's a requirement these days that when you're composing these pictures, it's the same thing on Thor. There's I mean, to be sort of technical about it, everything, an octave above middle C in terms of the orchestra. Everything is really on average below that. It's all down below. That makes it more contemporary and more rock and roll. If anything's above that, it tends to be pulled back in the mix or very short and it sweeps in and goes away again. But it's down and dirty. The music for Thor, indeed for Artemis Fowl, and it's more cool to have this bottom edge of stuff. So you're slightly restricted in your sort of your choices. So and it's got to be simple yet spot on for the picture. So these are all tricky demands, and again, it's a craft. You try one thing, you try the other, you strip it back, you add this, you take away that. Anyway, it was tough. That was the toughest part of the picture, dealing with the troll. Anything that enormous, to compete with it and be musical and to drive it forward in terms of this ever-changing cut, because these films the cut's always changing because that's the nature of them, and that makes it even more difficult for a composer when the cut is really never constant. And until way down the line, because of visual effects coming in all the time. So you're constantly adapting and changing. But in a way, it doesn't seem like the time, but the music gets better and better. It really does. It's like streamlining your work. So, but I love doing this score, and I've got some great feedback. I've got some friends who watched it with their kids and just absolutely loved it. So in fact, I watched it myself the other night, and in fact, the very first night, I think it's the first film to come out on New Disney Plus channel.
Yes.
So it's a real fantastic family picture. It really is for all the family. And I sat down and I'd forgotten the pain. these big movies. I sat back and enjoyed. I really enjoyed it as a fresh member of the public, and I just loved it. I thought it was fabulous.
Now, I've got a few Artemis questions for you, Patrick, but as I ask them, everyone who's watching this podcast, please put your questions together. We have an awesome composer, Bobby Johnson, who is going to be monitoring and feeding me questions. So put them together. And so my next thing about Artemis Fowl that I found really pleasantly surprising was the whole Irish nature of the score.
Yeah.
I did not expect that.
Well, the thing is, obviously it's set in Ireland, and I wanted to obviously have a strong Irish flavour. Although I'm Scottish, the Scottish traditional music and Irish traditional music, they've been intertwining over the centuries, and I thought I'm not going to get hung up on being completely Irish or avoiding anything that may be idiomatically more Scottish than Irish. I won't get worked up about it. That kind of detail and minutiae just gets you tied in knots. I wanted to just reflect the flavour and element of the world of the Irish Celtic tradition, which I greatly admire. My background has been both, but my name is Irish, and I was brought up in Scotland, but where I come from, it's known as Little Ireland, and so I was brought up, so I was once removed from the Irish culture. But there was a great opportunity to write an Irish, many themes of sort of Celtic nature, in particular the Artemis Fowl and his father theme, which Zoe Conway played beautifully. I discovered I looked on the net and I wanted to find a really good classical stroke Celtic fiddler or violinist. And when I saw her work, I was on YouTube, I was thrilled, and she did a fantastic job. And then I discovered that Bill Whelan, who did the music for Riverdance, Bill has written concertos for her. I saw Bill for the first time very, very recently. And she did a marvelous job. And I've used the Uilleann pipes, which are lovely Irish, a lovely Irish instrument, and lots of Celtic whistles. So I also initially, when I first spoke to Ken, I said a lot of this is Celtic rock. I feel reading the script. I had a note of music we had discussed. That was my first impression, and that's indeed what it became. I knew then I wanted very close mic, single solo violin or solo fiddle, right up against the mic, give those very, very close to the mic. So you get a sense, and also the Celtic instruments closer to the mic, so you get a sense of a small Celtic band with a huge symphony orchestra behind them. So this sort of Celtic rock and roll thing was in the back of my mind before I began to compose, and that stayed in place. So when you see the character Holly flying through the sky, you hear this wonderful Celtic player. Zoe did all the close mic stuff, as well as the beautiful sonorous melodic writing. She just extraordinary player with great heart, and you cannot replicate or fake a true Celtic musical heart, which she has. An extraordinary player, and I could tell that on YouTube that she played all sorts of different styles, and she would take this in her stride, which she did, and wonderfully exact in her rhythmic sort of exactitude and clarity. So I was keen to have it cool and Celtic, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Now you're a survivor in a lot of really great ways, especially musically, where a lot of composers who started off writing these wonderfully robustly symphonic old school scores, haven't been able to kind of make their success continue, but you have. and especially Thor and Rise of the Planet of the Apes showed how you could bring more contemporary rhythmic electronic elements. Jack Ryan has quite a bit of that to keep you
Yeah.
fresh and contemporary. And in Artemis Fowl, you really get that because again, you almost have like fairies as the kingsmen, if you will. What was it like
Yes.
kind of developing that new musical muscle and bringing that high tech sound into Artemis Fowl?
Well, that's a wonderful way to phrase it. Musical muscle. Um, I I suppose. I mean, it was quite a conscious thing on my part. Um, I suppose, looking back on my career, and I've been very, very fortunate. But at the same time, um, I've told this story often. When computers come along, um, I had not embraced them for a while, and 3 or 4 calls came to me, and they wanted me to demo the entire film. And up to this point, I worked old school, play piano. It goes like this. I thought, oh, this is changing very, very fast. So, um, I bought I bought all sorts of. I spoke to some younger people who use this gear. I said, what do I have to do? Bought all the gear, and it sat there in a box for about 9 months. That was like saying the computer was saying like, "Open me up, come on, open me up, come on, come on, come on. Now's the day, now's the day." And I was terrified for months. I thought, "Oh God, I couldn't even type at that point." Now I'm a fairly good typist, um, but emails. I mean, thinking about it, emails had were in maybe 4 or 5, 6 years, and if that, and all the kids were at it, and I was like, "Oh my goodness!" So I really had to drag myself into this technical world, albeit in a very basic way, because I still rely totally on um, younger people to come in as my programmers, etc. But I knew that I would have to adapt or die, and that's the thing. And the secret is, I think, that number one, you have to adapt or you die. Secondly, you have to surround yourself with young people. I think, part not all totally, but younger people who will challenge you, and they know what's in the zeitgeist, and they will say to you, "No, that's very 80s. It's not even retro 80s. That's 80s. Don't do that." Or so it's like having a musical counselors there that they'll in terms of a the king or the queen who has a council. You advise. I mean, now I sort of know the score, pardon the pun, but that was part of the process. So it was quite conscious. Um, so I mean, someone said, I remember another composer said to me, "Oh, he was very surprised in a slightly patronising way that I did Thor." Um, but as I said, well, the thing is, I'm not unaware of how these terrific scores, modern scores, are constructed. It's just another form of music that one has to listen to, which has become a la mode. And but I think what I wanted to do was with Thor, and I think if I say so myself, I pulled it off. Was to It wasn't completely original, but to take the symphony orchestra and to take these powerful drums and this Wagnerian touch to it, as well as being contemporary, in part of the zeitgeist, and that would be my sound, and this was the ideal subject matter for this, and so I applied the same technique to this film and to Planet of the Apes. You've just got to be, and also I continually buy new sounds. I'm always updating my team by saying, "Oh, here's a great sample here, great sample there. Get it, get it, get it." You've got to invest in new sounds, fresh sounds. Keep your palette. Never sort of continually use the same sounds. Also, you create your own sounds, create your own effects, musical effects. So it really is about. It's about. I often tell the story to young composers about Frank Lloyd Wright, the great American architect and artist. He during the arts and crafts movement was this huge star, and then I think a period of 30-year elapsed where he was away doing his own thing. And all these, the young vanguard came along, and all these Art Deco designers. And if I remember the story correctly, and he, of course, was watching this um, and thinking, "Oh yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting." And then he was asked to do Falling Water, the commission for Falling Water, which of course everyone knows is one of the greatest iconic pieces of architecture. It sits in the middle of this wonderful estate with obviously with a river, a little waterfall, and is extraordinary work, fluid yet square and fluid, extraordinary achievement. And then of course, Time and every magazine was full of it. This huge star. We thought he was dead, he was over, and then of course there was this huge sort of flux of architects from all over the world just begging to be part of his um, coterie of students. So, I mean, I'm not saying I'm up there with Frank Lloyd Wright, but it's a similar thing. Handel, George Frederick Handel, it's a well-known fact that he was a very highly successful businessman and an astonishing composer. But when opera was no longer fashionable, he thought oratorio. It's really opera where no one moves. They stand in a row, and it's less expensive to mount it. Still the same crowd, still the same box office. So he was very wise and wily, and he composed for as long as he breathed. So certainly, as long as I am fascinated by film, and I love music, which I'm passionate about, then hopefully I'll keep on doing this, adapting and not dying.
That would be a good thing.
Hopefully.
So now I'd love to get to some audience questions. We have one from Louis Vercinelli. He's a huge fan of your work, and actually one of his favorite scores is the very first score you did outside of Ken's orbit, which was Shipwrecked for Walt Disney.
Oh yes.
He'd love to see it come back on CD. Tell me a little bit about working on that.
Well, it was a Norwegian production originally called Haken Hakensen. It's a very famous story in Norway, and Disney bought this film, a negative pickup, and they changed the title to Shipwrecked for an English audience, and they were very keen to have both Ken, if I remember, Chris Montan, who I'm great friends with from Disney, he had just started at Disney, and I just finished Henry V, and he said, Patrick, your name come up 3 times in the one day. And Andy Hill, who was assistant, said he'd seen Henry V, and these people from John Jacobson and Niels Gaup, both the producer and the director of Shipwrecked, were keen to use me. And obviously, Chris, I was a new kid on the block, I suppose. So I met Chris this day that he'd heard my name 3 times in one day, and the job became mine. And this was in the middle of a Renaissance theatre tour of the world, and Ken and David Parfitt very kindly let me do an MD took over the show, and then I moved on to do this pitch. They were very kind to let me out of the contract for this great opportunity to work with Disney, and a lifelong sort of working relationship with Chris Montan has become a great friend. A very difficult score, Louis, a very difficult score, with millions of notes, and that really is a classic old school score, swashbuckling with, and I studied in great detail Norwegian music, which is not too far removed from Scottish music, because in fact, there's an area right at the north of Scotland called Sutherland. Ironically, it's called Sutherland, paradoxically called Sutherland. Although I always wondered why it's called Sutherland when it's away up in the north. In fact, because it was referred to as the Southlands by the people from Norway and Scandinavia. That's where the Vikings went, to the Southlands. That's why it was called Southernland. So I studied a lot of, I listened to a lot of Hardagger fiddle. Obviously, I'm very familiar with Grieg's music. So those heavily influenced that score, but very difficult writing.
Now, Joseph Batt is also a big fan of Shipwreck and Goblet of Fire, and he'd love to see expansions of those scores. Are you aware of any scores in the future of past scores that will be expanded that you can talk about?
No. Can you repeat the question, please? We've been
Oh, sure,
expanded.
absolutely. Joseph Batt is a big fan of Shipwrecked. He'd love to see it expanded in a yeah, and he'd love to see an expanded Goblet of Fire. Are there any expansions of your older scores that you're aware of that you can talk about that you'd like to inform us about?
You mean in terms of concert music, to have them?
Film scores coming out again, but like like how like Dead Again came out through La La Land, but like greatly expanded.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Well, I'm not sure, but that's a point. I mean, the Shipwrecked. There seems a lot of people. I get a tremendous amount of feedback about that score, and my son Patrick Doyle, who's also a great composer, he loves that score, and he says, "Dad, how did you write that stuff?" But I'd love to see it re-released. But well, I could ask, and I could ask them also about Goblet of Fire. Who knows? I certainly will make inquiries.
Now,
there's no plans at the moment.
Now, James Anthony Phillips is a huge fan of Thor. He'd love to see it turned into an opera. Are there any scores of yours that you could imagine like turning into an opera?
Well, I love opera. Thanks for the question, James, and pleased to talk to you. But I love opera, and I'm a huge fan of opera, massive fan of singing and singers. Yes, it's a great idea. In fact, originally Wagner, as far as I know, Wagner, his very famous Ring Cycle, he initially was going to base these great operas that he planned on the Norse stories, and went the other way. So they certainly, it's a very good question, because it would make a great opera. I suppose nowadays you've got movies really are the modern successor to opera. And now that there are so many live performances of films, and I recently saw the Goblet of Fire conducted brilliantly by Justin Freer at the Albert Hall. Now that to me is as operatic as you can get. It's a hugely successful medium for presenting music and film in a heightened dramatical way. I don't think. Yes. The mounting of an opera is so expensive, and the work that the composers have to do for an opera is quite intense. For you don't know how many performances. That's the thing. I've been asked in my time to write an opera. In fact, a couple of occasions I've been asked, 2 or 3 occasions I've been asked to write an opera, and I thought to myself, well, I'd be lucky to get, I don't know, 30, 40 performances. Who knows? It could be more than that if it was a huge success. But although I'm passionate about it, it would have to be something that would be a guaranteed audience, because it's so destroying to do that much work and maybe possibly not get any more than a few performances. For example, Schubert, the composer, spent his entire life trying to, in fact, wasted far too much of his extraordinary talent trying to write an opera, but it wasn't his métier, it wasn't his thing. It just his thing was symphonic music, and his strength was in symphonic music and chamber music, and of course these great songs. But funny enough, the world of opera wasn't his scene. Certainly, I know that my work is dramatically driven. And it's a great idea, a fantastic idea. If someone came along and said, "Let's do Thor or do Harry Potter or something into an opera," great. Um, then I would adapt it.
Now, your work is always distinguished by wonderful themes. Artemis has a flock of them. And Ace Vapsarov would love to know, what is your process for developing a theme?
Hi, Ace. Well, the process of thematic development stems from your study of, for example, Artemis Fowl. I pull on my experience of Celtic music. You look at the story. Um, you look at the relationships between Artemis and his father, and Milch and uh, and his character, and his interrelationship with Holly and um, with Artemis, and then when you watch the drama, see it cut together, the movement, then the ideas start to germinate. But it's really the characters and the story that are the inspiration for uh, for these themes. I mean, as far as I know, there are 5 or 6 themes in Artemis Fowl. The principal being the one that Zoe Conway plays as it became a sort of small violin concert piece, which is used, I believe, in the end titles. Um, and this has also been given with a great film and a great director, Kenneth Branagh. You're given the opportunity, and I'm given great opportunities as a composer to develop my lyrical side. But really, is character based. Your melodies. You can take, um, for example, Ken asked for a piece that was meant to be played on camera, which never ever happened. The scene was dropped, and it was a scene where, in fact, this early cut, very early cut, had Artemis Fowl's mother in it, but the story changed, and he wanted a piece that Artemis was learned to play on the violin, a Celtic air. So having read the story and visited the set and talked in great detail with Ken about the film, I thought of this melody. Da da dee da da dee da da dee da da dee da dee. So and that was written for this particular scene, and then we actually Fergus actually learned to play this tune on the violin, and it was never ever used. That became integral to the story. So that's how that theme came around, for example. So all of these things come from unexpected areas and end up in the film.
Now, I mean, you have an incredible diversity. Not only can you write these big orchestrally robust scores, but you can also really strip your sound down. And an acclaimed movie that really just showed that was Robert Altman's Gosford Park. And Henry Stanley
Yes.
would love to know what it was like working with Robert Altman.
Well, Henry, I'll tell you now, it was a brilliant experience. Um, we became great friends, and especially his wife Catherine. When Robert died, we kept in touch. And shortly before she died, she was round at our house for dinner. I met both Robert and his wife Catherine. I met them at Kenneth Branagh's house. He kindly invited us all over for a meal, and I met them there. And he called me out the blue. Many months later, I actually forgot all that he was doing Gosford Park. I knew that he had been doing his picture, and I forgot all about it. And he called me. I was on holiday in our house in France, and he called me up, and he has a reputation for being, like a really um, tough guy, director in his young days, I think. But he called us up. And he said, "Listen, It was quite funny. He goes, "Hey, listen, Patrick, um, I got this movie. I got a few composers in mind. You're top of my list. There's no money. There's no time. So what do you think? And I thought, great, big sell. And I thought, well, let me think about it. And then he explained they were using Ivor Novello songs, who was a great musical theatre composer in the 30s, 20s, and 30s. And I was aware of this guy's music. I used to play it in restaurants and bars and stuff. I used to play this music years and years ago. Um, but I say it strikes me as if you need a musical director, not a composer, because he told me there were 5 Ivan Novello songs in the score. He goes, no, we're looking for a guy to do some work as well. And I says, well, I'll think about it. And then, I'm always thinking, God, he was a wee bit rude, that guy. So I said to my wife, it was about 6 o'clock at night, and it was a lovely evening. She was sitting outside, we're both having a glass of wine. And I says, he phoned us up, he's got another composer in mind, and no money, and whatever. And I'm not sure what to do. And she says, which is very much like my wife, what else are you doing? What else are you doing? So I thought, well, it is Robert Altman, he is rather famous. So anyway, I called him back. I said, okay, we should talk about this, Robert. So he sent me the film, which was remarkable, to France by courier. Of course, I loved it. And then he said a very funny thing. When after we were talking about spotting the picture, we're deciding where the music should go. He said, as I was walking out the door, he goes, hey, Patrick, I just got to say this. I don't give a bleep how mediocre your score is. I got a great movie. So I thought this is, but then he winked. All he was doing was put me at my ease. He was just, I didn't find him difficult at all. He was a pussycat. My daughter Abigail sang 2 songs in it. She did a couple of demos for him. He goes, no, use her. And she even wrote lyrics with me and also with him. So he became a great friend of the family. I'm not a great one for whiny and dining directors. I don't do that. Ken Branagh and I have we developed a friendship through theatre and other things. And only very recently, I've got very, very close to a couple of other filmmakers. But generally speaking, I was busy and got on with the job. But we got very close to Robert and his wife. And that film was very, very, very special in many ways. And what was interesting, right in the middle of that scoring that, Robert was in my room here, in fact, for a meeting, and my daughter came in and said something terrible has happened in America, and that was 9/11.
Oh,
So that was it. That was, to be with Americans when that happened was quite an upsetting thing, both to see it and also for them. I felt when I saw those images standing with Americans, I felt sort of embarrassed, really. Just I didn't want to be in a room with them. I felt it wasn't comfortable. It was such an awful time. But so it's amazing how these, obviously, that who would forget that? It's a terrible, terrible thing. But that was right in the middle of that film. But we had, the upside was we became great friends, and the film was just a joy. The tiny writing in it was all it was demanded. He never asked me. I just thought, this is a head movie. This is to do with inside people's heads and people with suppressed emotions. It's a very English thing, to be cliched about it. That kind of stoic thing. A lot of that stoicism goes on, and they love this sort of whodunit thing. I'll tell you a funny story. He came round the very first day. Robert came round to listen to, and I have a couch to here that I sit and sort of watch more comfortably. I watch playbacks and stuff, and Robert lay down on it, and I played the first demo to him, and after I finished playing, I turned around and he was fast asleep. He had been up all night partying, and he woke up. He goes, "Oh, listen, I heard half of it. It sounded great, So it was so chilled out, the whole experience. It was wonderful."
wow. Now, Victor Field, another fan of Thor, would like to know, would you want to do another Marvel film? Any characters that you've discovered along the way?
Hi, Victor. I would love to do one if I was asked. I'd be delighted. So I suppose that answered your question. I'm busy. I I I'm a great one for a great believer in visualizing as a person in terms of, if you, this is advice I give to all young composers, not only to work really hard and keep your ear to the ground and see what's out there and be adaptable, as I was talking about earlier, but also to set yourself some some dream jobs in terms of the fun you'd have. I try to have fun as much as I can, and so if I visualize, um, let's say working in New York or working in Los Angeles or working in France or Italy, it's amazing how things tend to come up. You end up going to these countries. It's bizarre how it works. Um, so I suppose if I think about it, perhaps it'll happen. Who knows? But I've done Thor. I'm very happy I've done that. Um, but if it came back, of course, I'd be delighted. I'll just go with the flow.
Now, your next project, artist Fowl got in under the deadline, before the whole Corona pandemic hit. But now
Oh
you have
yes,
another score coming out with Ken, which is
right.
Death on the Nile, follow up with Hercule Poirot from Murder on the Orient Express. And now you're
Yeah.
in the post-Corona world of having to do the score. What is that experience like?
Well, it was is I had John Adams, the composer, said I've been in lockdown all my life working, and that made me laugh. I thought I totally agree. It's sort of different for composers in that, but what's fortunate here, we we are in two different rooms and we're about 15, 20 feet apart. So when Will and I were together, we're literally miles apart working together. Not so much now. It's only 2 meters, but we used for the first I think month we both worked at home through Zoom. It wasn't ideal, um, but it's been difficult, and I believe the editor was in Ireland, and the sound person was in his home with the gear. It's a lot easier now because, for example, voiceover artists have their own gear um, in their house. So, and of course now composers can send demos down the line, MP3s and WAVs, etc. So it's not so crucial. I just feel for all those who have to physically go into their workplace and can't do that. Um, I really feel for them. It's been an extraordinary time, and I've never seen anything like it in my life. Um, but unfortunately, it hasn't hindered the progress of my work in this film.
So I imagine there's going to be some sort of an orchestra for Death in the Nile, maybe like an exotic ethnic instruments being used. How do you see the orchestra getting together for the film? I mean, I heard that Abbey Road reopened.
Well, the what I've heard so far is, and things are changing as we know all the time. So far, what I've heard is that musicians are going back into the studio, but they're spacing out 40 at a maximum to allow for spacing between all the musicians. And this is the plan. If that is still in place by the time we record, and we're recording in a few weeks' time, and that would be the plan to record the strings, for example, over a number of days, and then the woodwind on a separate day, the brass a separate day, and that way it's not ideal because the way I like to work is, um, always as well as also hearing the demo, the pre-recorded synth sounds, um, and percussion possibly. Then you hear the whole orchestra play the cue, then you record it, separately, the brass and the woodwind and the strings if you feel you have to. But not to have this, we're going to have to rely on the demos providing the brass and woodwind for the strings while they're playing it. Um, so it's not quite acoustically ideal, but nevertheless, these are strange times, so unusual methods are required. I'm
How do
sure
you
it won't
think this
affect the
whole
quality.
how do you think this whole experience that's affecting the world, that's affecting musicians, film scoring, how do you think it's going to change you as a composer? Do you think it's going to make you stretch yourself in terms of the music that you explore that can be done?
Well, what's interesting on a personal level, I was asked to write a piece away from film, which I'm doing a lot more of as I'm being asked. The more you do, the more you're asked. Um, Maggie asked me to write a piece for an album. This is Maggie Rodford, my agent, and she arranged this charity album, a sort of lockdown album, uh, and she asked various composers from the agency, her music agency, to write a piece, and I had a melody that I'd written for uh, my former piano teacher and mentor who died about 6 7 years ago. Her name was Edith Ferguson, and I used to refer to her house as it was a very very small what they call council house in Scotland, um, and these are government houses, and she was this wonderful grand lady, but beautiful heart on her in her, and huge inspiration, a great friend, a lifelong friend, and I'd written this piece for her, um, and as well as another piece, and I chose the other piece um, uh, to send to her, and this other melody I had plans for it at one point, so I then orchestrated. I used it as a piece of for solo violin and orchestra, um, and I'm possibly doing it again with some woodwinds and brass added to it. And so that, because of the lockdown, I was asked. I wrote this a piece away from film. Um, it's good. It's good discipline to write away from a movie images and imagine your own film in your head. So this piece is called Shadow Ferguson, and it's really a homage to this wonderful woman. But in terms of the future of your writing, I suppose you add it to your experience in life, and who knows, it may appear in your work further down the line. Certainly, there's certainly this piece I wrote for Edith. Um, it moved me because it reminded me of her, and there is there's a strange contemplation and inward thinking that everyone's had to do, and reassessing of where you are and what your priorities are and what's important. There's lots of that, um, but I've been less affected than most people, so for me to be philosophical is a lot easier. Other people have had much more difficult than me, so I hesitate to be talking too much, of any kind of particular profundity. Of course, there's a whole movement in the midst of it, this Black Lives Matter, etc., and this seismic change in the world that's going on, and I think that's far more, uh, let's see, far more affecting and influential in our lives than these great, enormous seismic movements going on for each of us to accept each of us for what and who we are, uh, irrespective of the color of our skin. And long may this wonderful seismic shift and education sort of continue. Um, but it's a strange old time, so um, who knows? We all wait and see for things to return to normal, and I gather I mean, we're all gathering, they're slowly doing so, but hopefully that will continue.
So my final question for you, Patrick, is when you look back at all the terrific films and scores that you've done with Kenneth, what do you think makes this friendship, this creative collaboration work for as long as it has to the point of Artemis Fowl?
Well, there's a I suppose there's a process of there's a synergy there, and we can read each other's thoughts, and he's very respectful of my opinion, And if I and he, I always say this. I hesitate to give views on his work um, without a thorough understanding of what he's looking for and perspective that he's after. Um, and even there, and I will obviously suggest things that may go a different direction, but retaining the integrity of his wishes. There's a great respect in from each of us about our own work, about our respective works, um, and he's uh, he's incredibly hardworking, as indeed I am, as Jesus am I, and there's a great um, empathy and this strong sort of Celtic connection that's a very in fact Celtic connection is a festival in Scotland, which in fact I composed a piece of Scottish overture and a choral piece last January. I was asked to do so, but that Celtic connection, it's a great title. That is a really strong one, especially in terms of your sense of art and music. He's an incredibly erudite person, and he's extremely well read. And I think you've got to, like any smart person, you've got to bring a certain amount of education of your own and interest and artistic curiosity of your own into a relationship. Um, when you're working with Brian De Palma, and equally with Ken or Brian De Palma, for example, when he says to you, "This is more like Tristan and Isolde," you've got to you have to know your Wagner to know what he's talking about, or Pelléas and Melisande. Um, so when these are references he makes. Or at one point I said to him, "This reminds me of an Edward Hopper painting." So you've got to know your painting, you've got to know your American paintings, at least something about American painting. So there's that in our relationship. There's a great knowledge and an interest in everything that's out there that we both bring to the collaboration.
Well, it's a really fun collaboration, and you can watch Artemis Fowl on Disney Plus and get Patrick's music on Walt Disney Records. And Patrick, I just want to say thank you for joining us, and I just want to give a shout out to the many people who helped this transatlantic show happen. Our producer Mark Northam, our audience question taker Bobby Johnson, Patrick, your assistant Will Temlett, Alice Atkinson, Maggie Rotford, and over at Disney, Maria Kleinman and Holly Battaglia. Thanks, everyone, and thank you all for watching. And next July 1st on Wednesday at 4 o'clock, we're going to have Brian Tyler joining us to talk about the third season of Yellowstone. Patrick, stay healthy, stay safe. I can't wait to hear what you're going to be doing for Death on the Nile with Ken.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you, everyone, for your help in the production. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.